The moment someone stops chasing an avoidant and redirects their energy toward their own life, goals, and well-being, a profound psychological shift occurs that often reverses the entire relationship dynamic. The avoidant, who has grown accustomed to being pursued, accommodated, and prioritized, suddenly finds themselves in the unfamiliar position of being the one who initiates contact, seeks attention, and works to maintain connection. This reversal happens not because of manipulation or strategic game playing, but because the withdrawal of pursuit energy fundamentally changes the psychological dynamics that have allowed the avoidant to remain passive and emotionally distant. The avoidant's entire defensive system is built around managing and controlling others' emotional investment in them while minimizing their own vulnerability and risk. When someone consistently pursues them despite their withdrawal, mixed signals, and emotional unavailability, it validates their belief that they are the prize worth chasing and allows them to maintain their superior position in the relationship dynamic. The pursuit confirms their desirability while requiring no reciprocal investment, creating a comfortable dynamic where they receive emotional benefits without having to provide them. However, when that pursued energy suddenly disappears and is redirected elsewhere, the avoidant loses their psychological anchor and finds themselves in uncharted emotional territory. The person who once organized their life around the avoidant's needs and moods has become genuinely unavailable, not out of anger or manipulation, but because they've discovered more fulfilling ways to invest their time and energy. This authentic redirection of focus creates a vacuum where the avoidance ego once fed on consistent attention and validation. The psychology behind the reversal. The reversal occurs because avoidants have unconsciously structured their relationships around being pursued rather than pursuing. Their psychological comfort zone involves being the object of others' desire while maintaining emotional distance and control. When someone stops chasing them, it disrupts this fundamental dynamic and forces them into psychological territory they've spent years avoiding. The vulnerability of wanting someone who might not want them back is unsettling. The avoidance sense of security in relationships comes partly from knowing they have emotional backup options and that others are more invested than they are. When someone stops pursuing and becomes genuinely unavailable, it threatens this security by suggesting that the person might find other sources of fulfillment and connection. This possibility triggers the avoidant's deep-seated fear of abandonment, something they've been defending against through their emotional distance and superior positioning. The psychology of scarcity also plays a crucial role in this reversal. When someone's attention and energy were consistently available despite poor treatment, it felt abundant and therefore less valuable to the avoidant psychology. Once that attention becomes genuinely scarce because it's been redirected toward more rewarding pursuits, its perceived value increases dramatically. The avoidant begins to crave what is no longer easily accessible. The reversal also occurs because the avoidance ego structure requires validation and significance in others' lives to maintain itself. When someone stops providing this validation through pursuit and accommodation, the avoidant experiences an ego threat that motivates them to reestablish their importance and desirability. They begin pursuing not necessarily out of genuine love, but out of a need to restore their psychological equilibrium and sense of superiority. Most importantly, the avoidant begins to experience the unfamiliar sensation of missing someone who isn't chasing them. Without the constant availability and attention they've grown accustomed to, they start to recognize the actual value of what they've been taking for granted. This recognition often leads to increased appreciation and investment in the relationship, the energy shift that changes everything. The crucial element in creating this reversal isn't just stopping pursuit behaviors, but authentically redirecting emotional energy toward personally fulfilling activities, relationships, and goals. The avoidant can sense the difference between strategic withdrawal designed to manipulate them and genuine disengagement that stems from finding better uses for one's time and emotional investment. Only authentic energy redirection creates the psychological conditions necessary for the reversal to occur. When someone authentically redirects their energy, they stop monitoring the avoidance moods, stop analyzing their behavior for hidden meanings, stop making excuses for their treatment, and stop organizing their emotional state around the avoidance availability. This represents a fundamental shift from external focus to internal focus, one that the avoidant can sense even without direct communication about the change. The energy shift also involves developing genuine fulfillment from sources other than the avoidant's attention and approval. This might include pursuing neglected friendships, advancing career goals, engaging in creative projects, or exploring new interests and experiences. The key is that these activities provide real satisfaction rather than serving as distractions from thoughts about the avoidant. As this authentic redirection continues, the person's entire emotional landscape changes. They become less reactive to the avoidance behavior, less available for immediate response to their communications, and less willing to drop their own plans to accommodate the avoidant's sudden availability. This shift is felt energetically by the avoidant, who begins to realize they're no longer the center of this person's emotional universe. The avoidant also notices that the person seems happier, more confident, and more engaged with life when they're not focused on the relationship. This observation can be both attractive and threatening to the avoidant, who may feel simultaneously drawn to this positive energy and concerned about their diminishing importance in the person's life. The avoidant's psychological response. When avoidants realize they're no longer being pursued and that someone's energy has genuinely shifted elsewhere, they experience a cascade of psychological responses that often culminate in them becoming the pursuer. Initially, they may feel relief at the reduced pressure and demands for emotional availability. However, this relief is typically short-lived as other psychological forces begin to emerge. The first significant response is often confusion and curiosity about the change in dynamic. The avoidant notices that their usual patterns aren't producing the expected results. Their withdrawal doesn't create pursuit, their mixed signals don't generate anxiety. Their emotional distance doesn't motivate attempts at bridge building. This confusion forces them to pay closer attention to the relationship dynamic and the other person's behavior. As the avoidant observes the person's genuine engagement with other aspects of life, they often experience a form of jealousy or envy that they may not immediately recognize. They begin to resent that this person has found sources of fulfillment that don't include them, that they seem happy and content without the avoidant's attention and approval. This resentment paradoxically increases their interest in reestablishing their importance in the person's life. The avoidant also begins to experience the unfamiliar anxiety of uncertainty about someone else's feelings and intentions. Previously, they could count on the other person's consistent interest and availability. Now, they must wonder whether this person still cares about them, whether they've moved on emotionally, whether they might find someone else who appreciates their energy and attention. This uncertainty triggers attachment anxiety that motivates pursuing behaviors. Perhaps most significantly, the avoidant starts to experience genuine missing and longing for the person who is no longer chasing them. Without the constant availability and attention, they begin to recognize how much they actually enjoyed and valued that person's presence in their life. This recognition often comes as a surprise to avoidants, who believed they were relatively indifferent to their partner's attention. The manifestation of avoidant pursuit. When avoidants begin pursuing, their approach often differs significantly from typical pursuit behaviors because they're operating outside their psychological comfort zone and may lack experience with vulnerability and initiative in relationships. Their pursuit typically begins subtly and may not be immediately recognizable as such, often manifesting as increased interest in the person's activities, more frequent communication, or attempts to reestablish their relevance and importance. The avoidant might begin asking more questions about the person's life, showing interest in their new activities or relationships, or expressing curiosity about their emotional state. This represents a significant shift from their typical self-focused communication style and indicates growing investment in understanding and connecting with the person who has redirected their energy. Their pursuit often includes attempts to reestablish their special status in the person's life by sharing vulnerabilities they've previously withheld, expressing feelings they've kept hidden, or making gestures that demonstrate their care and investment. These expressions of vulnerability represent major psychological risks for the avoidant and indicate genuine motivation to reconnect. The avoidant may also begin initiating contact more frequently, suggesting activities or experiences they can share, or making themselves more available for interaction. This increased availability and initiative represents a complete reversal of their typical relationship patterns and demonstrates their growing recognition that they need to invest energy to maintain the connection. Sometimes, avoidant pursuit manifests as subtle jealousy or possessiveness about the person's other relationships and activities. They may express concern about new friendships, ask probing questions about other romantic interests, or subtly compete for attention with other people in the person's life. This jealousy indicates their growing recognition of the person's value and their fear of losing access to that relationship. The authenticity requirement. For the reversal to be genuine and lasting, the energy redirection must be authentic rather than strategic. The avoidant can sense the difference between someone who has genuinely found fulfillment elsewhere and someone who is performing disinterest while secretly hoping to trigger pursuit. Only authentic disengagement creates the psychological conditions necessary for the avoidant to experience genuine missing and motivation to pursue. Authentic energy redirection involves actually finding the redirected activities and relationships fulfilling rather than using them as tools to manipulate the avoidant's interest. The person must genuinely enjoy their new pursuits, feel satisfied by their redirected focus, and experience real growth and happiness from their changed priorities. This authenticity is what makes the energy shift palpable to the avoidant. The authenticity also means that the person's availability for reconnection, if the avoidant does pursue, must be based on the avoidant's demonstrated change and investment, rather than relief that they're finally showing interest. The person who has authentically redirected their energy will have developed standards and expectations that the pursuing avoidant must meet, rather than simply being grateful for renewed attention. Authentic redirection also involves maintaining the energy shift even when the avoidant begins pursuing. The person doesn't immediately drop their new priorities and activities to refocus on the relationship just because the avoidant is finally showing interest. They maintain their authentic focus while evaluating whether the avoidant's pursuit represents genuine change or a temporary reaction to the loss of their ego supply. The timing and sustainability factors. The reversal from avoidant distance to avoidant pursuit doesn't happen immediately and requires sustained energy redirection over time. Avoidants often initially interpret changes in their partner's behavior as temporary moods or phases that will pass if they wait them out. Only when the energy redirection proves sustained and authentic does it begin to affect their psychological equilibrium enough to motivate pursuit. The timing of the reversal varies greatly depending on the individual avoidant's psychological makeup, the depth of their attachment to the person, and their capacity for recognizing and tolerating their own attachment needs. Some avoidants may begin pursuing within weeks of authentic energy redirection, while others may take months to recognize what they've lost and respond accordingly. The sustainability of the reversal depends largely on whether the avoidance pursuit stems from genuine recognition of the person's value and desire for authentic connection, or simply from ego threat and a need to reestablish their superior position. Pursuit motivated by ego threat often diminishes once the avoidant feels secure in their desirability again, while pursuit motivated by genuine appreciation tends to be more sustainable. For the reversal to create lasting relationship improvement, The avoidant must maintain their increased investment and availability even after they've successfully re-engaged the other person's attention. This requires them to recognize that the energy redirection occurred because their previous behavior was inadequate, and that maintaining connection requires ongoing effort and investment rather than returning to their previous patterns once they feel secure again. The potential pitfalls and challenges. While the reversal from being pursued to pursuing can create positive changes in avoidant behavior, it also comes with potential pitfalls that must be navigated carefully. The primary challenge is ensuring that the avoidant's increased pursuit stems from genuine appreciation and desire for connection, rather than simply ego threat and a need to reestablish control. Sometimes, avoidants pursue intensely until they reestablish their sense of security and desirability, then revert to their previous patterns of emotional distance and unavailability. This cycle can be particularly damaging because it creates false hope about the avoidant's capacity for sustained change and investment. The person who redirected their energy must remain vigilant about whether the avoidant's pursuit represents genuine transformation or temporary adjustment. Another potential pitfall involves the person becoming so gratified by the avoidance pursuit that they immediately abandon their authentic energy redirection and refocus entirely on the relationship. This premature shift can quickly restore the previous dynamic, where the avoidant feels pursued and returns to their emotionally distant patterns. The reversal can also create power struggles where the avoidant attempts to reestablish their superior position once they've successfully gained renewed attention and investment. They may test whether they can return to their previous behaviors without losing the person again, essentially trying to have both the security of knowing the person cares and the freedom of not having to reciprocate that investment. Maintaining the energy shift long term. The most crucial aspect of creating lasting change through energy redirection is maintaining the authentic focus on personal fulfillment, regardless of the avoidance response. This means continuing to prioritize personally meaningful activities, relationships, and goals, even when the avoidant begins pursuing and attempting to redirect attention back to the relationship. Maintaining the energy shift requires developing such genuine satisfaction from the redirected focus that the avoidant's attention becomes a welcome addition rather than the primary source of validation and happiness. This internal shift protects against falling back into pursuit patterns while creating sustainable attraction based on the person's fulfilled, independent energy. The long-term maintenance also involves setting clear standards for the avoidant's sustained behavior rather than being satisfied with temporary increases in attention and availability. The person who has authentically redirected their energy will have experienced what it feels like to be genuinely valued and prioritized, making them less willing to accept the breadcrumbs of attention that previously felt sufficient. Most importantly, maintaining the energy shift means being prepared to redirect focus away from the relationship again if the avoidant reverts to previous patterns after successfully re-engaging attention. This willingness to consistently prioritize personal fulfillment over relationship security creates the ongoing psychological pressure necessary for sustained avoidant change and investment. Conclusion. When energy is authentically redirected away from chasing an avoidant and toward personally fulfilling pursuits, it creates psychological conditions that often compel the avoidant to become the pursuer. However, this reversal is only meaningful if it stems from genuine recognition of value rather than ego threat, and only sustainable if the person maintains their authentic focus on personal fulfillment, regardless of the avoidance response. The goal isn't to make the avoidant chase, but to build a life so fulfilling that anyone wanting to be part of it must demonstrate genuine appreciation and investment.